I can see you, I can see me. I'll be the eyes so that I just can be.
This is a special episode of a new series called Enough for All of the podcast Walk, Talk, Listen. This special series sheds light on 75 years of an NGO called CWS. My name is Maurice Bloem. Okay, good day, everybody. This is yet another episode of the podcast series about Church World Service 75 years old. And I'm really delighted to have John with me today. And I would like to ask John to introduce himself and tell a little bit about himself as well. John, please go ahead.
I'm the Reverend John McCullough and President Emeritus of Church World Service. It's been one of the greatest honors and privileges of my life to have served as the Executive Director and then President and CEO of Church World Service, beginning in the year 2000 and concluding at the start of 2021 at the end of January. So just grateful for the opportunity to have served in this amazing organization and to have an opportunity to be in conversation with you today.
John, you're the President Emeritus of Church World Service, but I would like to ask you a question about your time as the President and Executive Director. If you look back at your tenure as the CEO President, what would be your top three of your proudest moments?
Well, certainly, I think there's a variety of sort of significant moments. I think, for one thing, while for the public it doesn't mean quite as much, but for us internally, I think it meant a great deal, and that was to successfully oversee the process of separation from the National Council of Churches, and to not only do that, but then also to help build for a more constructive relationship moving forward. So it didn't end in our falling out of relationship with one another. We reformed the relationship. So that's something that I'm very, very proud of. Early on in my tenure, I introduced something that I called the Africa Initiative. That was something that I felt, I sensed that there was a lot of frustration trying to support development work within Africa, that there was a perception that a lot of the resources that were being poured in were not being utilized properly, and so resources were being wasted. And I'm very proud of the way that CWS was able to work with the World Council of Churches and with the helping to sort of reestablish the All Africa Conference of Churches, and then get connected with the Africa Union, and then to help forge an effort to build a community of eminent persons within the continent who could speak to people in power, and looking at how resources could be utilized much more effectively, and so that the people would be able to really sort of benefit at the grassroots is something that was important to me. Another thing that was working with the Roma, and there was coming out of the Bosnia War, there was a lot of fracture within that region, and very little will on the part of people to work with each other and a lot of the resources, international development aid, dried up, and so not only NGOs but governments and et cetera really sort of pulled out, and but CWS, we recognized that there still was a need, and we made the commitment to remain, and part of that was to center in on the plight of the Roma, and I'm very, very proud of the fact that we did that, and that has now given us the capacity to have a very effective level of presence throughout a huge area of Eastern Europe that would would not have existed had we not done that. So, that's something that I'm very, very proud of in terms of my tenure in the organization. The question itself is one where probably you asked me today, what are the 2 or 3 things that I would point out. Those would probably be the things that I would say today. But then you asked me 3 days from now, and I would probably give you a very different list. And just because I think that CWS really played a critical role. I mean, certainly the work that we did following the tsunami in Indonesia, I think our presence was phenomenal, and a lot of people. I mean, people are aware of the fact, of course, that of the tidal wave and what that the tragedy that wrecked upon that society, but there was a war. I mean, there was a civil war that was, I guess, that was already unfolding in Banda Aceh and the environs, and so it wasn't just about sort of responding to a natural disaster, but also a man-made disaster that was unfolding. So I think that certainly is something which is very important. I could also turn to looking at how CWS responded to Hurricane Katrina, and which was massive. Very proud of the way in which we as CWS went into that situation. It was very difficult because it was in the U.S. and most of the churches that relate to CWS had their own sense of presence in that setting, and so trying to forge sort of a level of cooperation, and then at the same time you had all the different celebrities that felt like they needed to put their own brand on something in response, and corporations that needed to put their own brand on something down there, and so that was a moment that sort of changed the face of what relief looked like in the United States. But then, look, I have to say, CWS has been absolutely phenomenal in its stance in favor of refugees and the right to migrate to the United States. And so, the work that we've done along the southwest border and the work that we've done to raise our voice on Capitol Hill to try to influence U.S. policy with respect to making sure that this country, that the U.S. Continues to be a leading presence of hope for people in the midst of enormous despair. I think is work that is probably as historically important as anything that CWS has done over the course of its history. And certainly as I've moved into my status as emeritus, it's something that I certainly have signaled to the organization that I think that the organization needs to continue in its commitment, not only in terms of providing opportunities for people to find respite here in the United States when they need it, but also to look at the mechanisms by which that can be accomplished in a variety of countries around the world when people feel the necessity to flee in order to find a place of safety. So yeah, it depends on sort of when you're asking me the question.
Mhm.
There are a lot of things that I can point to. I do think that I'm not certainly trying to brag about my 10 years,
Mm.
but the reality is that this organization is infused with just incredibly brilliant people who are absolutely committed to a vision of real transformation and change around the world, and who are willing to go the extra distance
Mm.
to try to make it happen. So it's certainly not about one person. It's about us as a collective. That's what Church World Service is all about. It's a grassroots movement, and I think that the impact has been nothing less than profound.
Thanks, John. I like to ask you an additional question, because you alluded to this global mobility. So that has to do with your vision about the future of CWS. So can you elaborate a little bit about it? What does that exactly mean, that CWS needs to focus on global migration or global mobility? And is there more to it? How do you see it?
Well, yeah, I'm glad to speak to that. I mean, there are so many different things about CWS, that we haven't even addressed. So that, I mean, you just can't dismiss or minimize the importance of Church World Service, as we refer to as the crop hunger walk people.
Mm.
I mean, again, sort of the grassroots community of people who care so deeply about what's going on in the world. That they're willing to make personal sacrifice of their own resources, but then also to encourage their neighbors to also contribute, so that real change can take place. And my vision has always been centered on understanding ourselves as a global village. That's not to say that I'm not enormously proud. I am an American, and I'm certainly proud of the fact that I am an American. And like every society, we have our virtues and we have our warts. But nonetheless, I'm certainly proud of the fact that I'm an American. But I'm very much someone who believes that it is God's intentionality that we were created as a global village, and so we have a responsibility to really care for each other, and so the solution to problems that exist within our global village is never about trying to look at how we can facilitate everybody that needs to find again some kind of help to come to the U.S. or to any other one country. It's about how do we make sure that in each and every setting around the world where people find themselves, that they in fact have the opportunity to enjoy the kind and quality of life that, from my perspective as a person of faith, I believe God really intends for them to have. And again, I mean, I tried to encapsulate that earlier, but I fundamentally believe that everybody has the right to have their dignity respected. There are rights that people have, and those need to be protected. Government exists for the purposes of protecting human rights, and making sure that people have the opportunity to live the kind and quality of life that they desire, and that's not the same everywhere. That what looks like appropriate housing in New Jersey, where I happen to live, is not necessarily the same thing, that exists in Sarajevo, and it shouldn't. There really should be a variable from that, and but everybody should be able to have the opportunity to have the kind and quality of housing that they feel provides that honors their dignity and provides them a safe space for themselves and for their family, that they should be able to access good, nutritious food that helps them to live a healthy life, to have access to clean water. They should be able to access health services so that when they do fall ill or any member of their family does fall ill, that they have options that are available to them. That education. We all know that education is the key to development of any society, and so every parent should be able to feel as though he or she uh, uh, can enroll their children into an environment in which they can learn without interruption and without fear of their own survival. And so the list goes on and on and on of those really sort of basic things. So unfortunately, we live in the midst of a world in which there continues to be a tremendous amount of instability, and so there are reasons why people feel as though they have to make a decision, and it is a decision to uproot themselves. And sometimes it is because of civil conflict, because there is a war that has broken out, and we all know that a lot of people endure those situations at length, but then there does come sort of that breaking point in which one decides, well, look, we just can't continue to stay in this situation. So we actually have to move. For some people, it's moving from one community to the next community over. But some people, it's a decision that they actually have to leave their country and just go somewhere else. So sometimes it's about civil conflict. Sometimes it's about economy. That people feel as though they just can't make a living. There's no matter what they do, they can't derive enough resources to enable them to be sustained as a family at the level in which they feel they need. And so they look to go somewhere where they believe those opportunities will exist for them. And in other cases, it may be about religious persecution, and so they have their values, and they feel as though those values are under siege, and so therefore they feel that they're unwilling to compromise those values, and so therefore they feel as though they have to make a different decision. And so there are lots of these different kinds of reasons that have given people the cause to be uprooted. But the biggest one that is forthcoming is climate, and so I think I think we have to recognize that we live in the midst of a world in which we already have a tremendous number of people that are having to relocate for some of those other reasons that I've already mentioned, and it's enormous numbers of people. More people are rooted because of civil conflict and economy and persecution today than at the end of World War II. But a tremendous number of people are uprooted just because of those factors alone. And then at the same time, studies have clearly demonstrated, and certainly through variety of big studies that have been done, but certainly through huge organizations like the United Nations, the IMF, and others, the World Bank, have clearly demonstrated, that the impact of climate is likely to result in another 150 million people or more being displaced. And so that's just because, they can no longer rely upon fresh sources of fresh water. They can't rely on growing seasons, and so they have to move. What's being demonstrated is that that's not just a third world problem. It's a problem that exists for everyone, potentially, and so even a country like the United States, where the largest population centers are coastal. Just look at the dynamics of the Atlantic coast, the Pacific coast, the Gulf Coast, up along the Mississippi River, around the Great Lakes region. I mean, it just goes on and on and on in terms of where the population bases are. And so when you're talking about rising sea levels, you know, that was a clear example of even a so-called first world country, where climate is going to have profound impact, and not in the not too distant future. That's part of why I think, when I talk about what my vision is for CWS. I mean, for me, for my perch as emeritus, but then just as a citizen of the world, you know, this is an issue that global migration is an issue that I think is huge, and we have to pay attention to it. And I when I say global migration, I'm including climate change, because it's all part and parcel of the same thing. And I think, if there's anything that really sort of threatens our global civilization more than anything else, it's that. And all of us really needs to take this seriously, and not play politics with it, but really recognize it for what it is, and to do whatever we can to minimize the amount of impact that it potentially can have, not only for those of us who are living today, but for generations to come.
Yeah, I really appreciate you lifting this up, John. For the listeners, we are close to 80 million people that are displaced. So definitely, and that number is increasing, as you mentioned, John. The other thing is just to remind the listeners that in 2016, the world adopted 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So, and that goes from end hunger before 2030 until end poverty, etc. But the problem is, or one of the biggest challenges in trying to achieve those 17 Sustainable Development Goals is because there are so many people on the move, where then most countries don't take responsibility for those people on the move. So if you really want to make this world a better world before 2030, you better ensure that you also include people on the move, because they are very often forgotten. So I definitely, I agree with you that it is a very important issue to pay attention to. But I would like to ask you if you still remember the first time that you heard about Church World Service.
Actually, I do. For me, it was, I think, I would say approximately maybe 1977 or 78. I was serving a church in Weston, Massachusetts. And I was the associate pastor of the church, and part of the portfolio was to be in charge of youth and young adult ministries. And in my search I had a very large group, and in my search for activities, I heard about something called the Crop Walk. And so it was actually something that was occurring in a neighboring community, and I reached out to the director, and had a conversation with him. And gentleman by the name of Bill Wilde, and he told me all about it. I thought it would be something of interest, and I thought also, just given the nature of the community that I was serving, which was a fairly affluent community, they could be very, very helpful to the cause. And so we arranged I asked him if he'd like to have our participation? And he said, yes. And I said, well, I have a large group. And he said, about how many? And I said, I have about 100 youth.
Mhm.
And he was very excited. And so we worked out the details, and we got the young people involved in the crop walk.
Wow.
That was the beginning of the journey.
When you heard about the crop walk, it was also in conjunction with Church World Service. It was not that, because that we faced a lot of challenges around the crop hunger walk, that people knew about the crop walks, but didn't know about Church World Service. But you knew from the beginning that it was something that Church World Service was behind.
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I can't say that I necessarily made that connection. I think if I were to say, when I specifically knew about Church World Service, I would say that came at a later time, and that was when I was serving in charge of mission personnel for the United Methodist, and by virtue of the portfolio that I held for the denomination, I was one of the designated representatives to the Church World Service, what was called then the Unit Committee, essentially their governing body. And so that's when I really connected with the name Church World Service, and would make the connection between the Crop Hunger Walk and Church World Service consciously. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. No, and when we are talking and kind of doing some research on Church World Service 75, 20 years under your leadership, can't be denied. But can you tell a little bit how you got involved with Church World Service 20 years ago now, right? So
well, like I said, I mean, I was on the governing body,
mm-hmm.
And I did that for 9 years. So I had a long run in governance with the organization, and at the time that I began to establish a more formal relationship, or a staffing relationship with Church World Service, just prior to that, I was elected to be the first vice chair of the board, of the unit committee, for the organization, and a principal part of that responsibility was to lead on strategic planning, and that coincided with a decision on the part of the then executive director, Rodney Page, to retire. And as a result of that decision, I was approached about possibly stepping in on an interim basis, just because the headquarters for Church World Service and for the Board of Global Ministries for the United Methodists were located in the same building. So it was really, from my vantage point, it was really a request of convenience, and I felt it was something that I could actually do. And so, um, so I made that decision and discussed it with my supervisor, and who was very open to that possibility, and said certainly I could be seconded to CWS for the length that was needed, and it could return to my regular job when the search was completed. And what I can say is that this happened at a time that I was scheduled literally for a round the world tour, because I was in charge of missionaries around the world for the United Methodists, and so I had already organized this visitation tour with the missionaries in a number of hot spots. And it was on that itinerary that by the time I arrived, I returned to the U.S. I had pretty much concluded that I had done what I felt I had set out to do, in charge of mission personnel, and I was open for a change. And so I informed my supervisor when I returned that I would accept the interim position with Church World Service, but I would not be returning to the Board of Global Ministries. So, but it wasn't my intent to go to Church World Service and to remain there. For me, it just represented the moment of making a clean break from one area of responsibility and then being opened to something new, which I didn't believe was going to be church world service.
So how long was the interim period? And can you also tell us something about why you decided to apply, or when you were asked to apply, why did you decide to do it? And then the third aspect to it also is what you were thinking in terms of what your biggest task was ahead of you when you started, when you ultimately became the executive director and president of Church World Service.
Well, the interim period pretty much was thought to be a period of about 3 months. I think the governing body thought that they would be able to successfully complete a search process within that time frame, and that sounded pretty reasonable to me. So I mean, that started as of July 1st. So really, by the end of September, they expected that they would have the process completed, and that seemed to work very well as far as my schedule and needs were concerned. I guess going into CWS, I didn't have any great plans for it. I really went just to be a stabilizing presence at a critical moment. But I remember, I guess it was probably during my first week there as the interim, I felt that if I was going to be in that role, I should know more about the organization. So that was sort of in the early internet kind of days, or when websites were really sort of being set up. But I remember sitting up one night saying, "Okay, let me take a look at Church World Service through the lens of its website." I guess I probably started like about 9 o'clock at night, and about 2:30 in the morning, I said, "Oh my gosh!" I mean, I just, even though I had been sitting on the governing body, my interests really only related to overseas personnel, which was a very small component of church world service. And so I was discovering all these other aspects of the organization that were very interesting and very exciting. And so I made it my business to really become much more competent in terms of knowledge about the organization. I also knew, because I had been serving on the governance body, that there were very strong feelings that this was a time the CWS needed to be moving in a different direction. And prior to my taking up the interim position, CWS had decided that it was going to separate from being a unit of the National Council of Churches of Christ in the U.S. And become its own not-for-profit entity. So I became the first executive, albeit interim, but the first executive for CWS as an independent organization. And so that placed a lot more responsibility on my shoulders than had been carried by any of my predecessors. And there were areas of significant vulnerability because there were financial vulnerabilities, and there were a number of personnel concerns that governance had with staffing, and felt that those needed to be addressed. And so really all of that kind of fell onto me to try to figure out how to maneuver it. At the same time, the decision to leave the National Council of Churches was not popular or easily embraced. And it also had just accepted new leadership. And that new leadership had a very deep investment in reconciling the differences between CWS and the National Council of Churches. But as it turned out, the governing body of CWS was very determined that the decision to separate was in its best interest, and so it would not choose to reverse that. So I really had to sort of navigate through all of those processes. Just in terms of actually becoming a candidate, that didn't happen until that September. um, the the chair of the board had been asking me to consider becoming a candidate,
And who
and
was the board chair at that moment?
that was Canon Patrick Monty
Okay.
from the Episcopal Church, and we're certainly very good friends and
Mm-hmm.
and respected each other's body of work, but he had been asking me to really consider taking the permanent position, being a candidate for it, and I was really not interested and very reluctant about doing anything in that direction, and so I kept telling him no, but he was very persistent, and because he was a friend, I ultimately said, "Okay, Patrick, I'll go ahead and put my name in there. I'll fill out an application and for consideration." I said, "But I'm going to be very upfront with you. I'm not interested in this role," and so I did. And in September, when they were doing the interviews for uh, the candidates, it was really sort of the first round of interviews.
Mm-hmm.
I had to cross town from the west side over to the east, and I stopped at Grand Central Station, and I was a little bit early for my scheduled appointment, so I decided needed to find a way to kill some time, and so when I walked out of Grand Central Station, there was a shoe shine stand, and I said, "Well, that's as good as anything," So I, can't say that I was one of those people that regularly would go and have his shoes shined,
Mm-hmm.
but I did that day.
Mm-hmm.
And it was sort of interesting that as I was sitting there and the man was polishing my shoes, that there was a certain awareness that came on me,
Mm.
that I should be taking this invitation to be a candidate more seriously than I was. And by the time I finished, he finished the shoe shine, and I paid him and walked a few blocks over to the Church Center for the United Nations where the interviews were being conducted. It was within that time frame that I said, "Okay, yeah, I guess if I'm going to interview, I should be serious about it." And so that's how I went into the interview. It was a shoe shine moment
Mm-hmm.
of a deeper consciousness, and I interviewed. Fortunately, because I had been actually doing the work of church world service for 3 months, I knew a lot more about the organization. I knew things that I thought worked well, and I thought I knew some things that I thought probably could be improved upon, and so I was able to speak openly and freely about those things.
Mm. So, John, can you share with us a little bit then? Why were you reluctant to go into this new adventure?
I'm a deeply spiritual person,
Mm-hmm.
and for those who may not be aware, I am clergy, and not that being clergy makes one spiritual, but it does point to a certain inclination.
Mm-hmm.
And so throughout my life, I've been very, very conscious of a higher power or being in my life, and have always looked to that
Mm-hmm.
to sort of point the way. And so, really, all of the major decisions that I had made in my life up to that point, as far as I was concerned, were spirit led. And but when it came to church world service, I didn't feel that way. When I was asked to step in on the interim basis, I didn't feel that way. I certainly felt that way in terms of relocating to New York to be in charge of mission personnel,
Mm-hmm.
and doing that work. And when I felt like I had done what I was called to do, it was easy for me to say I'm leaving because I felt like I had completed
Mm-hmm.
what I was asked to do. It was never my intent to be there forever and ever. It just wasn't. That's not the way I'm wired. So in the case of CWS, I really felt like I was accommodating a friend by stepping in on an interim basis, and it wasn't until that shoe shine stand that I actually felt a spiritual connection to the organization.
Mm.
That was the difference.
Yeah. And okay, take us then to, what happened with you when you finally became the final candidate and that you were asked to lead. How did you feel? Bring us through that. And then going back to the earlier question that I asked, did you have what did you feel was your biggest task when you were starting it?
So, they interviewed me for, I guess, a couple of hours, and when it was the interview was over, and I left and started making my way back across town. I, called home, and because I was, going to be catching the bus home, and my wife asked me how it went, and so, I said, oh, I think it went very well. I mean, and I felt confident about what I was able to share, and I felt that it was appropriate, and so forth and so on, and so I said, but there was, the only thing that bothers me is, at the end, they asked me if there was anything I wanted to ask of them, and I said the only question I had was, what do you foresee as the next steps in this process? And they said, well, the next step in this process will be to whittle this down to the top 3 candidates, and then to go into a next round. I said, I said to her, I said, well, I didn't reveal my feelings in that moment. I said, but everything inside of me said, I'm not interested in that. And so she said, what do you mean? And I said, well, I told them everything I think I know already. So if they want me to come back for another round, I'm not going, because I don't believe I have I have anything else to offer. So and that was just where I was. So by the time I got home and we were sitting around the dinner table, the phone rang, and the person from the search committee said, they were very pleased with my interview, and they had similarly come to a conclusion that it may not be necessary to have a next round of interviews. There was only one thing that they needed to know, and I said, well, what is that? And they said, well, we'd like to know if you would put together a vision statement for the organization where you would take it. And I said, well, yeah, I can do that for you. And so that's what I did. I crafted a vision statement and submitted to them. They were very pleased with that vision, and they offered me the job. So that's how all that went.
Hey, John, you must remember that when CWS celebrated its 50 years anniversary, it made a book called 50 Years of Help and Hope. If Church World Service would decide to make a book about 75 years, what are some of the keywords, according to you, that we would need to mention in the title?
I think that's a very interesting question that you're asking. Help and hope really had an enduring quality to it, and still in many ways reflects what Church World Service is all about. So I think when we're looking at, what has happened in the 25 years since Ron Stenning wrote that history of CWS, we would certainly find that those two words have a strong application. But at the same time, I think an organization like CWS is very reflective of the people that sort of embody it. And so when you're looking at those who have served on staff, those who have served in the governance, partners that we've worked with, and some of the kinds of national, meaning US national and global issues, then I think, a word like justice becomes a very, very prominent word, and is very, very reflective. It reflects the character of the organization and in a number of ways. But then, another word that is, I think, very prevalent is the word, transformational. And because I think CWS has a vision, for life or for the world evolving into a better place for people. So that's important. I guess the third word that I would lift up is one that we certainly have used a lot over the course of the last couple of decades, and that has been about transparency, which has been a very critical value of the organization. It means that you don't always make easy decisions because you do want to be transparent. You do want people to understand why you've taken a particular position around a certain type of issue that is unfolding, or why in one instance your position might feel much more progressive, and in other cases perhaps some more conservative, and sometimes it's just moderate. But I think as CWS we try to be very, very transparent in terms of the issues that we've worked on, and to be much more careful in terms of choosing where we would engage our time, our efforts, our resources, and our passion, as opposed to other things that we think perhaps don't fall within our range of expertise.
John, I would like to go in a different direction, and that is, and I know I'm pushing you here, but I'm going to do it anyway. Asking you to name one colleague or a partner or a supporter of CWS who best embodies of what CWS is about. If I ask you that question, who will you name and why? And because you are John, you can also name a couple as a
Yeah, it's such an interesting question. Again, because again, CWS is just about it's about the people who populate this organization, and there just are so many of them. I guess over the course of my tenure, probably the one person who I have leaned on more than anyone else to help me to think through what this organization is all about and what it means, and who I felt I could always trust to tell me if I was pointing in the right direction, or perhaps hadn't taken something into consideration, or needed to be aware of how a particular approach or policy or stance might be interpreted, is the Reverend Jennifer Riggs, who was part of the governance really even before I became executive of CWS, and was part of the leadership group, part of the executive committee at the time that I did become the executive, and and who has really been um, a source of real counsel to me over the years. I mean, if I name one person, you know, I can't not mention Jennifer
Mhm.
because I think she has. I mean, I think her. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Some of your listeners probably will not sort of appreciate this because they may not be as close to the organization as you and I happen to be. But I would say that her blood is not red; it's yellow and black. And so, I mean, she really understands what CWS is all about, and it has been enormously important to her. And even though she's was an executive within one of the denominations that is very much at the core of CWS. She was able to really sort of see her way well into the depth of what CWS is all about. Um, so she certainly is someone that I would identify as someone who really helped me a great deal, and who I respect a great deal. So many others that have been important teachers of mine, but one of them that um, who I will always be grateful to was or is Dr. Sam Cobia, who served as General
Mm.
Secretary of the World Council of Churches, and early in my tenure embraced me and welcomed me, and really welcomed CWS as sort of a distinct organization in still within that ecumenical framework of the World Council of Churches. And it was as a result of that he and I and ultimately Andre Caramanga, who was on the staff of the WCC and who became the general secretary of the All Africa Conference of Churches. So, and Andre is someone who I admire a great deal. The three of us were able to work together to figure out how to sort of rebuild um, uh, the work of ecumenism in Africa,
Mm.
where today it's a thriving entity, and but at the time it looked like it was having its last breaths, and so but Sam is someone who I have just tremendous respect for, and who was again a very important um, guide for me. Those two is as one who's based in the U.S. and one who's not based
Mhm.
in the U.S. And I can certainly mention others who were certainly willing to challenge me and uh, travel across the the ocean to partner with me, and to help me to see things perhaps in some different kinds of ways, uh, and um, uh, and whose counsel and friendship I value and will clearly value for the rest of my life. So since you said I could name two, I won't name you know um, anybody else, but but clearly those kind of people do exist, and they probably don't always know it in the moment, um, but when you pause and sort of reflect, then all of a sudden you realize that they're there,
Mm.
and that they have always been there.
And I definitely resonate with you mentioning in terms of Jennifer Ricks, for example, as somebody that is never afraid to challenge and to give advice. And I think if you look, for me, if you look across Church World Service, actually we are very fortunate to have many people who are like that, feel extremely passionate about the work of Church World Service and what they do. I you know that I often jokingly say, we have like, how many staff do we have? And they all feel that they are the owner of CWS, that they are in charge, and that brings its challenges. But I also definitely think that's the strength of this organization. That
Well, I have
tremendous drive and passion.
right. I mean, I've had the benefit of a leadership group, and I mean, it's been a variable over the course of the years, but then there's a core, that have been there throughout almost the entirety of my tenure, and I've relied very heavily upon those individuals to do their work and to do it extraordinarily well. They're brilliant people and very, very gifted people, and whose integrity just is unquestioned. And some of them were here when I arrived, and a couple of them joined. And again, you told me I can only name two, so I'll leave it there. But I've just had the benefit, and we didn't always agree. I mean, that's one of the good things, and I like to think that was part of the gift of my leadership, was that was creating space where people could have very different points of view, and express those, and not feel as though there was any sort of punitive recourse because they simply disagreed. Some just try to always create that kind of a climate in which we could have really sort of an open, honest conversation, and I never felt as though everything had to be done my way, and certainly there were times that I've certainly felt as though I felt like I was right, and needed to exert that as a direction, because I felt very, very strongly about it. But in a lot of other cases, listened carefully to what others had to say, and if I understood the rationale for why they felt perhaps we should take a different approach, I was willing to compromise and to support them, and to pursue that as a direction. And I think that's what happens when you have a movement of people. Is you create that space in which you invite the variety of views, and you honor each and every one of them, and you have the discussion, and then at the end of the day, a decision is made in terms of which direction we're going to pursue, and everybody gets in line with it. Or we certainly hope that that's the ideal, that everybody gets in line with it. And for the most part, that has been true in CWS. There have been times that people have made decisions to make other choices in their life, and that's fine. I mean, we're all free to make different decisions about what we think is in our best personal interests and professional interests, and that's fine. I certainly respect and honor that.
John, we come to my final question of this particular episode, and I really appreciate your willingness to talk with me. This podcast series is my attempt to show people within CWS and who have left CWS and people who don't know CWS what this organization is about, and hopefully with sharing of different stories they will get some idea of from my point of view, a great organization. My last question to you is what do you want to say, or what do you want to wish for CWS?
Well, I think I want to say that as CWS embraces its 75th anniversary, this is an opportunity to embrace a new vision for the organization. While during my tenure and those that served alongside of me, we arrived at a collective vision for the organization. I think that what the 75th opens up is an opportunity to see the world through a different lens, and the world has changed dramatically, and so even though I may have sort of cast in sort of a sense of what I think the organization ought to be about moving forward. I don't do that with any intent of trying to compromise the ability of the organization to see things through a different lens, and I really sort of invite that. I mean, I felt like it would be irresponsible for me to step down and to not offer a sense of where I believe that the organization ought to be heading. And But I've also been around long enough, and have gone through enough transitions professionally to know that when new leadership comes in, that they will see some things differently, and you don't need to see that difference as a negative. You can look at it as a positive, and that's so. As I look at my successor, um, Rick Santos, I think is he finds his way into this organization, and looks at what he hopes his gifts and graces will mean for the organization. I think it's important for all of us to support that, and to not challenge it and say, "Oh, it's all wrong." And um, so I'm hoping that the 75th will be a moment in which CWS will yes be able to cast a glance back and to celebrate what it has accomplished over the course of its history, but not linger there. I'm hopeful that instead the 75th anniversary will uh, be the moment in which um, the organization inhales and then exhales, and and breathes new life into the future. I believe that CWS has a great future. I think it's been demonstrated that the mission of helping people to find a place to call home, of ending global hunger and poverty, um, uh, of supporting the dignity of all people, that those are not things that have been accomplished, and so our work is not done, and so I hope that this organization will continue to see that and work at it as our predecessors did. I mean, this is not the 75th is not the first moment in which the organization had an opportunity to pause and to ask the question, oh, okay, have we done what we set out to do? And fortunately, each time that has happened, the organization said, we're not finished. There's still work to be done. So that's what I'm hoping for, Maurice, that it will say, we're not finished. We have work to do, and we have a great vision which is before us, and I hope that everybody will come together in the best tradition of what is CWS, and breathe new life into that vision. Yeah.
Thanks, John.
This brings us at the end of part 1 of my conversation with the President Emeritus of CWS, John McCullough. Part 2 and other episodes will be available soon. Thank you for listening to Walk, Talk, Listen. Please check us out on 100mile.org or follow us on Facebook or Instagram.
Will you be the eyes so that we all can be?
And if you want to know more about Church World Service, please go to cwsglobal.org.